One element of music which I think is too often neglected by songwriters is tempo. Most songs will stay at the same consistent tempo throughout their entire duration, and this isn't necessarily a bad thing. A consistent tempo can lend a song a sense of groove and stability, but playing with tempo can open up a whole dimension of expression. So today we're going to look at a variety of songs that use tempo changes to achieve expressive effects in the music. Perhaps the most typical type of tempo change is an increase in tempo, songs that get faster. Baba O'Reilly by The Who starts out at 118 BPM. But at 3:21 in, the tempo suddenly jumps up to 173 BPM. This has the effect of injecting the song with extra excitement and energy as it enters its outro section. It's like a gear shift of a tempo change. The song then closes by gradually increasing tempo, building energy and tension until the song finally comes to an abrupt conclusion. Come On Eileen by Dexys Midnight Runners is another classic song that plays with tempo. The majority of the song is played at about 110 BPM. But then at roughly the 3-minute mark, the tempo begins to gradually accelerate, climbing eventually all the way up to a climactic but brief 240 BPM. We then get the final chorus of the song. And what's really interesting here is that this last chorus isn't at the new tempo that we've climbed up to, 240 BPM, as that would be way too fast. The final chorus is actually played at about 120 BPM. But how is this drastic jump from 240 to 120 BPM so seamless? Well, because as you've probably noticed already, 120 is half of 240. So basically what was the quarter note here at the 240 BPM becomes the 8th note in the new tempo of 120 BPM. And therefore it doesn't really feel like a tempo change at all. It's just a change in which pulse we perceive as the main pulse. As you may have already noticed from the examples we've looked at so far, a lot of songs that change tempo will change tempo around the halfway point of the song. And this means the song gets a boost of energy and an injection of excitement right when the audience's attention might be starting to wane. A perfect example of this sort of tempo arrangement decision is Ike and Tina Turner's version of Proud Mary. Proud Mary was originally performed by Creedence Clearwater Revival, and their original version doesn't feature any tempo changes, being performed at a consistent solid tempo throughout. But on the Tina Turner version, the decision was made to start the song at a slower tempo of about 92 BPM. Working for my man every night and day. And then, almost exactly halfway through the song then kicks into gear with a jump up to 171 BPM. Rolling on the railroad. 2, 3, Now, as for why Tina and Ike decided to play half the song slow and the other half fast, well, Tina actually explains this during the intro of the song.
We're going to take the beginning of this song and we're going to do it easy. But then we're going to do the finish rough. It's the way we do. Proud Mary.
So we've looked at songs that start slow and then speed up. But what about the opposite? What about songs that start fast and then slow down? Take Me Out by Franz Ferdinand opens at the faster tempo of 143 BPM. But then at about 45 seconds into the song, the tempo begins to gradually decrease until we wind up at about 107 BPM, just in time for the guitar stabs and the subsequent riff. The remainder of the song then stays at the slower tempo, so it's literally just the intro here which is at the faster tempo. Franz Ferdinand obviously didn't have to put the intro at a faster tempo, so it's quite an interesting and unusual decision that they made here. Alex Kapranos from Franz Ferdinand explained in this interview how they wound up with this unusual choice of tempo. The verses sounded better played a little bit faster, and the chorus sounded better played a little slower, and we could never quite work it out. I had this idea that we're going to take all of the verses and put them at the beginning of the song, and then we're going to slow it down and play all of the choruses. A song that treats tempo in a similar way to Take Me Out is We Are Young by Fun. The song starts at the faster tempo of 116 BPM.
I know I gave it to you months ago. I know you're trying.
But then at about 40 seconds in quite an abrupt change, the tempo drops down to 91 BPM.
I'm trying hard to take it back. So if by the time the bar closes and you feel like falling down, I'll carry you home tonight.
The song then stays at this slower tempo for the rest of its duration. One of my favourite tempo changes is Prayer of the Refugee by Rise Against. The song begins at the already quite up-tempo 151 BPM. But when the song reaches its chorus, we are then quite abruptly propelled up to 197 BPM, supercharging the chorus with energy. Then at the end of the chorus, the song returns back to the original tempo of 151 BPM for the verse. To facilitate this reduction in tempo, there is this break in the rhythm so the faster chorus section can naturally end, ready for the guitar to reintroduce the slower verse tempo. Another song that speeds up and then slows down again is Welcome to the Black Parade by My Chemical Romance. The song opens at 75 BPM.
When I was a young boy, my father took me.
Then at about 1 minute and 45 seconds in, the slower intro section comes to a close, and we jump up to the much faster tempo of 194 BPM for the next section of the song. Then a couple minutes after that, we change tempo again, this time to the slower tempo of 88 BPM, much slower than the 194 BPM that we've just left, but not quite as slow as the 75 BPM of the intro. Another song that starts slow, speeds up and then slows down again is Evermore by Taylor Swift. The song begins at 100 BPM.
Grey November, I've been down since July.
But then at about 2.5 minutes in, the tempo jumps up to 121 BPM. Then after a minute of this faster tempo, we return to the original slower tempo. So we've talked about songs that start slow, speed up, and then return to that slower tempo again. But what about the opposite? What about songs that start at a faster tempo, then slow down, and then return to that fast tempo once more? Well, this is exactly what happens in the Beach Boys classic, Good Vibrations. Good Vibrations opens at the fairly brisk tempo of 153 BPM.
I love the colorful clothes you wear.
But at 2 minutes and 14 seconds in, the tempo suddenly and abruptly drops to 132 BPM. We stay at this new tempo for about a minute, and then jump back up to the original faster tempo. In a similar way, Paranoid Android by Radiohead uses drops and jumps in tempo to inject excitement. We start out at the already fairly laid back tempo of 82 BPM. But at about halfway through the song, the tempo drops even lower to 63 BPM, bringing a solemn mood to the section. And as the song reaches its close, the tempo then jumps back up to the original 82 BPM for the guitar solo outro. As you've probably noticed, a tempo change, particularly an abrupt one, creates the sense of a mood change in a piece of music. It creates the sense of a different chapter beginning. This bookending effect can make tempo changes particularly useful in what I would call episodic songs comprised of various contrasting sections, each with a different mood. Of course, the most famous example being Bohemian Rhapsody. Bohemian Rhapsody is comprised of 5 distinct sections, and one of the elements of the song that helps to bookend these contrasting sections is tempo changes. As we depart the ballad section and enter the operatic section, we get this abrupt, ear-catching tempo shift from 71 BPM to 146 BPM. Then later, as we reach the end of the rock section and approach the song's coda section, we gradually move from the upbeat 139 BPM to the slower 72 BPM, ready for the song's triumphant yet melancholic outro. Another song that takes advantage of tempo's bookending effect is Billy Joel's classic Scenes from an Italian Restaurant. The song opens in a loose 72 BPM for its introduction.
A bottle of white, a bottle of red.
Then the tempo drops down to 66 BPM for the laid-back sax break. And then after that, the tempo quickly climbs up to 97 BPM in time for the song's first verse.
Brenda Renetti were the popular steadies and the king and the queen of the bomb.
Then, once the bulk of the song has passed, the song returns to the original slower tempo to reprise its opening section. A particularly subtle tempo change is found in Elton John's Tiny Dancer. Just before the chorus, the music slows down by only about 4 BPM. This slight drop not only acts to illustrate the song's lyric of softly slowly, but the slight slowdown also builds that bit more anticipation as we finally approach the song's first chorus.
When I say softly, slowly, hold me close.
So far, all of the tempo changes we've looked at have been quite significant and long-lasting changes. When the tempo changes, it's not only noticeable, but it remains that way for at least a few bars. But another more nuanced type of tempo change is what's called rubato. Rubato is when the timing and tempo of a piece of music is allowed to swell expressively. Rubato itself literally means to rob, i.e. time is being stolen from one bar and given to another to inflate or deflate the tempo. It is particularly common to play with rubato in classical music. For example, if I tell MuseScore to play Chopin's Waltz in A minor at a fixed tempo of 108 BPM, it has a very solid, straight-ahead sound to it, and sounds quite unemotive. But if we listen to this performance of the same piece by Cassia, You can hear how they play with the tempo to bring emotion to the music, letting the tempo ebb and flow. Rubato isn't limited to classical music though. For example, on Thom Yorke's Dawn chorus, you can hear how Thom lets the tempo of his keyboard playing ebb and flow, giving the song a loose, free sense of tempo and timing. The last topic I want to talk about today is how attitudes towards tempo, about how to use tempo, have actually changed over the last few decades. Nowadays, it's almost just industry standard to record music to a click track. The grid interface of DAWs like Pro Tools and Logic incentivizes producers and musicians to record to a fixed tempo, as this allows for much easier edits and changes to the music later on. And although there is nothing inherently wrong with recording music to a fixed BPM, recording music to the grid, by keeping everything to the grid, it makes playing with tempo near impossible. Of course, you can write in tempo marks into the grid, but the way that performers play with tempo is more intuitive. It isn't necessarily something that's planned. So by fixing tempos onto a grid, you're robbing the musician of the opportunity to play with tempo. For example, Bohemian Rhapsody wasn't recorded to a click. It was recorded by first laying down a backing track comprising of bass, piano and drums, which were all recorded in the same room in a unified take. This allowed for any changes in tempo to be freely captured into the music. Rather than following a click track, the band relied on their own internal sense of timing and tempo, and although this did mean that capturing the perfect take took hours and hours, it also meant that once that perfect take was captured, all of these subtle movements in tempo and timing that lend the song such emotion were captured into the recording. If you check the tempo of older recordings, particularly those from before the 1980s, you will find that the tempo often fluctuates. For example, the tempo of You Can't Always Get What You Want by the Rolling Stones gradually increases during the song. I doubt this gradual change in tempo was intentional. Instead, I think it's the result of the band's energy as they perform the song. But allowing this energy to flow into the music rather than stifling it with a fixed click track gives the song more life and character. Of course, like I said before, there isn't anything inherently wrong with using a click track or recording to a grid. But if that's your default method of recording music, you're robbing yourself of the opportunity to play with tempo. You're almost ignoring an entire dimension of music. And thank you so much to everyone who supports me on Patreon, particularly for this video, because in this video, as you may have noticed, I've used longer clips of the songs to demonstrate the tempo changes, but the cost of that is that this video will definitely get demonetized. So it really is the support of you patrons that allows me the sustainability to make these videos, so thank you so much. A particularly big thanks goes to the higher tier patrons that you can see on screen right now, and Andre Sainz Diaja, Andy Deacon, Andrew Brown, Andrew Sussman, Austin Barrett, Austin Russell, Bob McKinstry, Boo Medell, Whitney Parker, Cameron Allvilla, Colin Aiken, Chris Cabell, Christopher Ryan, David Rivers, Donald Howard, Dr. Darren Wicks, Elena Skorchenko, Eugene Leroy, FD Hodor, Greg Kabowski, Ilamola Toner, Hamish Brocklebank, Hernick Kutcher, Hugo Miller, Ivan Pang, Jake Fisher, James Ko, J.A. Kokensparger, John Dye, Josh Sanderlin, Justin Vigor, Mark Ziegenhagen, Max O'Keefe, Melody Composer Squared, Melanie Schonert, Michael Vivian, Nancy Gillard, Nathan Lawrence, Nathaniel Park, Paul Middleton, Paul Muller, Paul Pazel, Peter Dunphy, Richard Bride, Roger Clay, John Kennedy, Steve Daly, Stephen Lazaro, Tim Beaker, Homer Aharoni, Trisha Adams, Tim Payne, Victor Levy, Vidad Flowers, Vladimir Kodakov, Volti, Waylon Fairbanks, and Zappod.